our benefit and also to put in the archives so that we know that with this program who actually attended. So thank you for that. And I'd like to introduce myself first. I'm Diane McNeil. I'm president of the Historical Society. This is my first year doing this, so I'm just kind of have learned some from my predecessors, especially Jenny Argerson, who's sitting back here, who I served vice president under for a long time, but she never needed me to step in for her, so which I thanked her very much for. And I want to thank the Millbrook Golf and Tennis Club for hosting us here tonight and providing us this beautiful setting and the hors d'oeuvres, and also contributing a lot to the program, giving us some of the background so that we could pull it all together and make this a great program tonight, which David will tell you more about, and everyone that was involved in that. Now, I'm sorry to announce that because we changed this meeting from April to June, we were going to have to postpone our tea. It was going to be in July, our annual tea, but we're not going to have it this year. So this is kind of the replacement for that. We were going to have it at the Millbrook School, and their mill house was going to be the center attraction of it. It turns out the mill house isn't going to be complete for us to be there. So that will be next year. So look forward to that. And any of you who are not members that would like to become members, there's a membership form back in the back on the table. And so you can sign up and become members of the Historical Society. It's only $25 for an individual for a year, or $30 for a family or a business. So we'd like to have anybody join. And if you don't know when your dues are up and you don't know when to renew, you can go ahead and fill out the form and send it in, and Jim will just add the year on from whenever you expire. It actually is on your label when your dues expire. And we also have a high school award that we give every year, and this year it went $1,000 to Benjamin Yeager, who's a high school senior who demonstrated great interest in local history. And that's one of the requirements. They have to write an essay to tell us why studying local history is important. And he really hit it right on the head with talking about old machinery and how he volunteered up at the fair with that and what he's learned. He wants to go into engineering, I believe. And then what he learned from older farmers, talking to them on how things used to be done on farms. So it was a great essay. Let's see. Another thing we found, we want to remind everybody that you have lots of treasures possibly in your house, in your attics, in your basements. So look around, and if you find any, we're always willing to look them over and see if it's something that the archives might like. We have the Historical Society Archives is in the basement right now of Village Hall, and we're collecting things. And for your own benefit, Ginny Augustine happened to find that somebody found a lunch menu from the Titanic. They sold it for $88,000. So those little treasures that you think might be garbage, they really might be worth a lot. And in case you missed last month's program on Helen Stafford Thorne, the Millbrook Garden Club, and the Garden Club of America, or any of our other great programs, they're all available on Facebook, the videos of them. Jim Sweeney is so nice to video all our programs, and then they're all on Facebook. So welcome to go on and look there, and also you can like us if you so desire. Now, other things that are going on around the county, for your benefit, the Dutchess County Historic Tavern Tour is in mid-swing. They did the Beacon Roundhouse, and they've also done the Rhine Cliff Hotel. And to quote our county historian, Will Tatum, he said, the Dutchess County Historic Tavern Trail highlights many of our iconic buildings and are historic contained in the epic landscape. These programs are a fun way to explore the links between history, cuisine, and local culture that make our area such a vibrant place. The next one is July 8th at the Elmendorf Inn in Redwood. Then August 12th, Disting House in Pine Plains. September 9th, Old Rovers in Dover Plains. And October 14th, the Kimlin Cider Mill in Poughkeepsie. You have to sign up ahead of time, and that's on meetup.com, or you can go on the Dutchess Tavern Trail on Facebook, and that'll lead you to that if you sign up. And they're only $5 a piece to go, and then you get a discount on what you buy. August 20th, here in Millbrook, we're having scenes from Unfinished, which is a new opera, which will be performed in a workshop setting at Grace Church. This is a collaboration between composer Millbrook's own Joshua Kaufman, and who is now an assistant professor of music at the University of Pittsburgh, and poet Sarah Hetty, to examine the legacy of Bennett College. This is a fusing of the original poetry, archival material, and contemporary testimony of Bennett alumni and the Millbrook community. Tickets for that will be $10. And you can go on Unfinished Opera at wordpress.com and put that on our Facebook page too, so that you can go the link that up. Okay? And I will now turn it over to Robert McHugh, our Vice President, who will talk about our walking tour that is coming up.
Hi, everybody. Well, we have a really exciting event coming up on October 8th, which is Columbus Day weekend. We've been organizing a walking tour. It's going to focus on just a couple particular streets in Millbrook. A couple particular streets in Millbrook. Right, Front Street and Merritt Ave. And there's 10 historic structures on those streets that are going to be part of this tour. So they go back, in some cases, to the 1750s. A lot of them were from the late 19th century when Millbrook became a village. And actually one of them is pretty much brand new, the new Thorn headquarters there on Front Street. So we're going to be advertising this a lot more and trying to drum up support in the community for it. But what we're really going to ask you to do, if you can volunteer your time as members of the society, people committed to disseminating information about the history of Millbrook, because there's 10 sites associated with this, and we need to staff all of those sites for 6 hours. We're going to need a decent number of volunteers. So if you're able to do this, willing to do this summer, all the people who work in the archives, and we're going to help gather information, history of these buildings. So you don't have to know all that stuff ahead of time. You don't have to be an expert in this stuff. We're going to provide you with the information that you need. But if you're willing to sit there for a few hours and meet people and talk to people and greet them and hand out some information to them and be kind of ambassadors for the history of Millbrook, we would love to have you do that. My lovely assistant here to the right, Sam, has some contact information. It's just got my email address and my phone number. It's got a list of all the different structures that are on the tour. So if you want one of those, you can just raise your hand or flag her down. And then reach out to me. Give me a call, email me, let me know you're interested, and we can sign you up to participate. Right, so the whole thing is 10 to 4 on that Saturday, and we're going to break it down into 2 shifts, because expecting someone to work 6 hours on a Saturday is probably a lot. So there's going to be 2 shifts, a morning shift, an afternoon shift, and that'll give you a little time then to visit the other sites yourself if you're interested. So let her know if you want one there. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Let me turn things over now to, man, everybody already knows, David Greenwood.
Thank you. This evening is the collective work of so many people. You'll be hearing from many of us tonight as we share different stories. But the reality is you all have stories to tell about the golf course. Some of it is very well known. Some of the information that you may be hearing for the first time. And that's the joy of discovery. We're so lucky to be able to be here tonight. The weather cooperated and everything has fallen into place. If there was one person that is responsible for the creation of what ultimately becomes the golf course, would anyone venture a name?
Morgan Wayne.
No? This is even more obscure. It's because of Helen Thorne. Now, Helen Thorne, last month, what was the topic? The Garden Club. Well, Helen Thorne, in 1888, was a house guest at Barrycroft. And Barrycroft was the first private home in the area to have a golf course. Now, what kind of golf course did they have? We don't know. It may have been 3 holes. But they were playing golf. And it became the most popular place for the young people to come in 1888. And guess who Helen meets playing golf? Oakley Thorne. And that motivation is what got a group of people together in 1900 to rent property and expand that property into the golf course that we know today. But the backstory on the golf course. It wasn't always a golf course. It was actually a working farm. And the name is extraordinarily important. The name is Willits. Anyone know the name Willits? The house is here, but here's the backstory. The Willits were 2 teachers at the boarding school. They had been students there. They came back as faculty. They worked at the school. Now, the boarding school, which is right next to the Quaker Meeting House, you all know the Meeting House. The boarding school was next to it. Quakers in the 1790s had the most curious belief. They believed that young girls should have as much exposure to math and science as boys. And everyone knew that young girls couldn't get their mind around math and science. The Quakers proved them wrong. And the Willits published the first textbooks, Mr. Willits on mathematics to be taught, and his wife was a grammarian. So the first textbooks that were published to be used in schools were right here. And that's their house. Isn't that extraordinary? But here's the other thing. In 1828, there was a schism within the Quaker community. And there was a reform. And that reform, simply put, was that some of the Quakers believed that you should be able to have plain song in service. Now, plain song is not with music, but it's think of singing unaccompanied. The Orthodox Quakers were horrified that anyone would sing in a meeting, because meetings were meditation and inspirational. So the group split. And the Willits family ended up coming to this site and having their own school. And here's the amazing thing. Surrounding the Willits, W-I-L-L-E-T-S, were a number of free black families living here on this golf course, part of the Willits farm. And their name Willis, W-I-L-L-I-S. And guess what? From 1790 on, those black families, all of the children, could read and write. Guess who taught them? The Willis. And that's the story and the legacy of this site. Fast forward. Who would have thought, right? Fast forward. In 1880, the Willis daughter died, and the property that was part of the Chamberlain, part of the Willis farm, 60 acres, ended up being rented from the estate by the Millbrook Inn. The Millbrook Inn was a destination, really important destination. And secondly, Halcyon Hall. And they had the makings of a golf course and expanded on this property. By 1900, the group, Oakley Thorne and others, McLean and others, got together and created an organization to actually take over and run a golf course. By 1902, they incorporated and became officially recognized and were able to purchase the property, 60 acres. But there were two other names. Morgan Wing, who at that point had taken over the Millbrook Inn and gave some of that property to the 60 acres that the club had purchased. And the second one was someone whose only claim to fame is that he owned the railroad right of way, the railroad bed, and he had stock in the railroad company that came through. And he gave the section, basically the width of the railroad tracks, to what became the club. So it went from 60 acres to officially 68 acres, and that's what the size is today of the club. Now, all of that may seem very confusing. It isn't. In the back of the room, after the end of today's presentation, take a moment and look at Jacob and his wife, the Willets. See the school that they taught at. See the Quaker connection. Because their farm is ultimately what became the golf course. On the other side of the room, we have a photograph, an aerial photograph of the town of the village of Millbrook. And if you look at it, you can make out the golf course and the neighboring houses. Now, in this light, it's going to be very difficult, but I happen to cut out the shape. Any guess what the shape is? That's the golf course, and I'm going to put it on the map so that you can see in context what the Willets farm was and what ultimately became the golf course. Interesting stories. That's all the background on how this evolved by 1902. But here's a problem, and anyone who's done research can appreciate this. Sound alike names. The Millbrook Golf and Tennis Club, the Millbrook Golf Club, the Millbrook Club. And if you look at newspapers of the day from the 1890s on, there's a confusion. And the Millbrook Club, people would read later on in 1930 and think, oh, that's the golf club. No, the Millbrook Club was a gentleman's club in the village, directly across from the post office. And if you look at it today, it's being restored. That property, technically that club, was organized officially in 1900, but in 1892, the group of men who also were involved with creating this club got together and bought property from the Reardon family. And what did they do? They commenced to create the Millbrook Club. And what was the Millbrook Club? Honestly, a way to escape wives, so that they could go and have their bourbon in the afternoon and not have to worry about distractions at home. Later generations know that club because it was the Masonic Hall. So if you know of the Masons, that's the building. And what's happening right now, that building is being restored to the way it was when it was first built. An extraordinary job and effort in the community. That building is going to be part of our society walking tour in in October too. So it's a must-see date. The theme for the program is the adaptive reuse. And so many of the buildings that we take for granted have an extraordinary history. And we are going to be able to visit those buildings and learn more about it. Anyway, that's enough of a tangent. I want to show you something, and that is, this is my stack of notes. But I assure you, I'm not going to read them to you. The research that we do in pulling programs together is really interesting, and the archives for the Historical Society will be inheriting my notes as village and town historian. They've already inherited Carmine D'Arpino's and Faith Tompkins and other people who have spent much of their lives documenting and recording local history. And those forms are available for anyone who does research. And it's a great resource, so we should all be very proud of what this society does. A couple of names that I put aside that I want to be sure, there we go, to make sure these names are included. Captain Richard Summers Hayes. Anyone know the name? He's the one with Barrycroft in 1888 invited Helen to be a house guest, and that's where she met Oakley, and the rest is history. My favorite quote about golf is this one from Mark Twain, and I suspect many of you know it. Golf is a good walk spoiled. That's Mark Twain. The other important element is there's some confusion about the clubhouse that's here. In 1900, an existing building on the farm was converted as the first clubhouse. That was very quickly replaced in 1902 with the building that we know from photographs that ultimately burned in 1930. That is all part of the evolution. The campus has evolved consistently over the years. The tennis house that we're in, the Flagler Pavilion, is another extraordinary resource, and many of you know the story. Mr. Flagler's daughter was married across the street at the Flagler estate, and he had the pavilion built for the wedding party. That was in 1927. In 1926, actually, when the building was being constructed, the club already put together a group of women to determine how to decorate it once it got moved across the street. So, 1926, there's a subcommittee of the good women about decorating it. 1927 is the wedding. 1928, that spring, it's actually open and ready for business. So that's how it happened. And there's some wonderful stories about moving it, dismantling it. At first the thought was that it was moved as a piece, one complete building. In point of fact, documentation now, it looks like it was dismantled, brought over and reassembled here. But those are the details for future historians to check nails and patterns. From our point of view, it's here. Now, this is all very dull until you put a face to the club. And that's where I'm so pleased to be able to introduce Skip Ciferri. Because Skip and I have been intrigued about the club for a long, long time. And when the idea of having a meeting here was first broached, I asked Skip, and Skip very kindly agreed. So if we're celebrating anyone, it's Skip's enthusiasm and dedication to the club and the insight that he has from a child on. So Skip, please.
Nice to see you. Nice crowd here. David asked me back last winter if I would explain some of the pictures that you saw at the Millbrook Round Table of caddies back in 1937. how that came about. And basically, what the Italian people contributed to the club, or the club, vice versa. So I've got a little bit of history on that. And it goes like this. You know, starting back in the 1920s, the Millbrook Golf and Tennis Club contributed a lot to the Italian immigrant community by providing jobs as golf caddies and laborers. Money earned from this helped many families. They also learned the sport. When they were caddies, they not only learned the rules of golf and golf etiquette, they also learned how to respect and interact with other people. They gave them great lessons. This gave them great lessons, which carried on throughout their lives. This tradition of caddying carried on through the 1950s and early 1960s. I was a caddy in Millbrook Golf and Tennis in the early 1950s. I'd like to tell the story of one of the earliest caddies. My Uncle Pat Ciferri started caddying in the Millbrook Golf and Tennis Club in 1928 at the age of 11. The first golfer he caddied for remarked that the bag was bigger than he was, as Pat was of small stature. There being no high school teams around or other means to learn the game, Pat learned during his caddying years. After being a caddy for 9 years, Pat, with the backing of his dear friends, Dr. and Mrs. McKenzie, applied for membership and was accepted in 1937. Pat would go on to win the club championship in the years 1937 through 1941. During these years, Pat played in many matches throughout Dutchess County with the Millbrook Club pro Tom McNamara and Joe Bernalfo against the best players of other clubs. Pat always respected and had respect of all the caddies of that era. Would hold an annual hot dog roast for them starting in 1937. In 1941, Pat entered the Army, and as most athletes, lost the time spent at war. He came home in 1945, married and started a family, and did not play golf again until the 1960s. Just before Pat died in 2013, 97 years old, I asked what the course looked like in the old days. A few weeks later, he made me a map with notes on it, which we have here on display. You see the table there. Some of the notes he wrote on there were 1928 to 1938. It says, 1928, Mr. Mike McCann was course manager and semi-golf pro. He had little time for playing golf or giving lessons. Mr. Tom McNamara was a professional in the 1930s. Tom was the longest-serving professional. He was a professional when most changes were made to the golf club, changes of holes and stuff like that. Tom McNamara was responsible. In the early 30s, holes 1 and 2 and 3 were eliminated completely. Holes 4, 5, 6, and 7 had major changes. Holes 8 and 9 had remained the same with no changes since the 1920s, with the exception of the adding 2 new tees. And he left me another little note on the front of this thing. This is the map. He drew it up on the middle of the folder. And I had it copied so we can keep it. He made me another one. He said, Skip, reference the second hole. A new green was made before I joined the club in 1937. The second hole remained on a par 4 for at least 1937 and 1938. If you're a golfer, you can visualize some of this in your head. Because in my matches in 37 and 1938, he played as a par 4. The course in those days was a par 36. The second hole with a new tee became a par 3. The course then played to a par 35. Most major changes to the course were made from 1937 to 1940. And then he little added note, he said, are you aware of where the condos that you built it was a lot that was all fenced in. Dairy cattle grazed there for years. Young fellows from Alden Place made a baseball bat and played games there. The milk cows always left their calling cards, deposits on the playing field. Life is simple. Cows and ball players shared the ground. And that was Pat when he was 97 years old. Let's go back to 1937 and the caddy hot dog roast photo. There are 44 boys in the picture. 42 of the 44 are of Italian descent. Many good things came from the boys in the photo later on. In the photo, there are 5 future club champions: Joe Annucci, Sal Malala, Vic Seppi, Dom Seppi, Nora Bartolomucci, and Ted Ciferri, with Nora winning the championship 2 times, Sal Malala winning the championship 5 times, Vic Seppi 6 times, and Ted Ciferri 9 times. And by the way, we have that champion sitting right over there, Vic Seppi. And he's sitting next to another club champion who happens to be here, John Gifford. Well, we'll sit over here, John Flanagan, we can check him out here. But also in the photo are all the members of the 1940 Millbrook High School golf team. It was runner-up in the national tournament at Bethpage, Long Island, South Course. They were undefeated for 3 years. The members were Sal Forte, Armin Malala, George Bartholomew, Charlie Marone, Anthony Mazzarone, Joe Viscolosa, and Ted Ciferri. In 1946, after returning home from World War II, Ted Ciferri played in the first Dutchess County Amateur Championship. He was the runner-up for the title to Ray Billows in a tightly contested match at College Hill in Poughkeepsie. A big crowd from Millbrook went to watch and cheer for Ted. This was reported by the Poughkeepsie Journal. To give you an idea of what Ted was up against, I'll give you a brief bio on Ray Billows. Starting in the 1930s through 1950, he was the New York State Amateur Champion 7 times. He was runner-up in the National Amateur Championship 2 times. He played in the Masters twice. And John tells me before he was in the Walker Cup team twice. And he beat Bobby Jones in a match at Augusta for $1, which he has a photo of. We had to send him a check. We have a great photo on the tables of Ray Billows and Ted shaking hands when they had this match in 1946. Ted went on, as I mentioned briefly, to win the club title 9 times in Millbrook. In high school, Ted excelled at basketball and baseball also. He's being placed into the High School Hall of Fame in November of this year. If you love golf, we have another thing that's on the table there, another book that was written by Rudy Zacci, who was a member and a club champion back in early 2000s, I believe. And Rudy did an awful lot of research, and with John Flanagan's help, put together this history. And it's full of statistics. If you like golf, it's good reading. But he did a great job researching, and some excerpts from Rudy's history are as follows. April 28, 1929, Millbrook Club gets McDonald for pros job. He won the Long Island title and was playing in the National Open this year, one of the best known pros in the East. So they had some high caliber golfers here. You know, this guy came in 1929. He was only here 1 year. And they hired another one, 1930, May of 1930. Tom Mercer was a new pro. He was from Lakeville, Connecticut. And in September 1932, after 2 years with Tom Mercer, they hired another pro by the name of G. Santon, new pro. And a year later, in April 1933, Henry Johnson signed on as a new pro. He was also a pro at New Smyrna in Florida. I think that's, Peter, is that where you're from?
Yeah.
New Smyrna. Right? And in 35, they hired Ted Smith as a new pro. He was a former Red Hook pro. And then it's reported in July 29, 1935, the club became incorporated. And August 29, 1935, Don Malala wins the caddy tournament with a score of 81. Armin Malala and Joe Marone, 83 each. Ted Ciferri and Jimmy Danielle, 99. Tom Massarelli, 106. So all those guys you see in that photo, they're all out there caddying, playing golf, and learning the game, and learning about life. And as you can see, the pros didn't last long until Tom McNamara. And Peter, you're an exception.
21 years.
I had 21. Yeah. Tom was here like 12 or 13 years, the most I can gather. On January 7th, 1936, Tom McNamara, new pro, youthful pro at Red Hook for 1 year. And he's a former caddy from up in Columbia County. He replaced Ted Smith and also replaced Mike McCann, the ground superintendent, who died. He did both jobs. Tom was married to a Millbrook girl. He was married to Yolanda Galupo. And I don't know whether this was before he came here or after. Not sure. Tom went on to hold this job until at least 1948, as far as I know. I went to grade school with his daughter. I think she left, went to Illinois after that. July 9, 1936, Millbrook Club. This is a good one. Millbrook Club, one of the country's oldest. This is a headline in one of the Poughkeepsie papers. Faces busy sports program. Tennis and golf meets are arranged. One of the oldest and exclusive clubs of its kind in America. Millbrook Golf and Tennis Club is playground of the local millionaires colony. May 15, 1937. Millbrook caddy gets hole in one. Irving Bluch Willis on the 7th hole on a Wednesday night. Bluch was a black man, caddied up here for years. He caddied when I was even a kid in the 50s. And he would play golf. They say he was a super golfer. John will tell you a little bit about Bluch. October 4th, 1937, Pat Ciferri takes Millbrook title. June 23rd, 1940, Great Millbrook Golf Team surveys trophy. Evidently there was a picture of the 1940 high school golf team with the trophy that they won down in Long Island. And October 11th, 1940, Pat Ciferri wins Millbrook rounds, routes Alec Kennedy 10-8. October 10th, 1943, Bills McCarthy dumped rivals 3-1 at Millbrook. They played Frank Sheridan and Tom McNamara. August 26, 1946, Billows tops Ciferri for amateur crown before a big crowd of 400 on the 30th hole. Ted shot a 70 on the front nine, Ray a 67. Ray was up 3 up after 18. August 26, 1946 is that picture that I talked about before of Ted and Ray shaking hands. September 3rd, 1946, McNamara set the course record at Millbrook for a pro. 64, 30-34. After McNamara left, we had no pros for the 1950s. Things seemed to quiet down. I'd like to introduce John Flanagan, who was a former club champion. He can tell you much more from the 60s on. Thank you for all being here tonight.
I need this. Can everyone hear me? No. No. I should kill you. I should sing. Let me say, in my life, I spent thousands of hours on this golf course as a youngster and later as a member, and I still to this day come up here. And when I was a kid, we used to come up here, my brother and I and other neighborhood children, sleigh riding, tobogganing. When I was a teenager, skiing. This hill back here, Morgan Lott, who had the Millbrook freezer, used to, on Saturdays and Sundays, run a power line down. And when you rode your sled or your skis down, he pulled you back up. Of course, years later, they had to stop that because of insurance and everything. But we used to fish in the pond. The big pond by Bennett College wasn't filled in with mud like it is now. We used to catch bullheads, perch, and the members know on the first hole there's a big culvert goes under the old railroad bank.
When we were kids in the spring, we'd come up here skinny dipping, and the water was running fast in that stream. Well, we'd get in there and we'd sit on our rear ends, there was moss on it, and we'd ride it out the other end and it drops into a hole, which was fine if you didn't hit a pebble on the way. But getting to my golf days, I grew up, I was born 4 or 5 houses down from the second hole. And at some point, we discovered golf, my brother and I, and these kids from the neighborhood. And there's a roadway going in now by the second hole that wasn't there. There was a little path. Beluch Willis and us kids used to use it. And we'd come out and we'd peek and look over the golf. There was hardly anybody playing here in those days. And we would come out and 30, 40 times a night, would play from the edge of the woods to the second hole, which was only 50 yards. Well, the superintendent here was George Bartholomew, and he was about 70, big, fat guy, and he knew who it was. They didn't want us putting on the green and everything. Well, people, friends of his, would come by the golf course, call him up and say, those Flanagan kids and their friends are up on the second green. So George had an old noisy dump truck. He'd come down the hill here from the clubhouse, bang, ba bang, but we knew he was coming. And he'd get down there and he'd get out of the truck. You little bastards, he says, I'm gonna catch you and I'm gonna kick your butt. And we'd be in the woods laughing, he'd get in the truck, go back up. So one night he goes to the Great Shade restaurant, my father's at the bar there. And he goes over and he says, Fred, he says, I just want you to know, if I catch your kids on the golf course, I'm going to kick their butt. And he looked at him, my father looked at him and laughed and says, if you catch them, I'll let you kick their butt. He chased us for years there. And the funny part is, when we were playing golf, you could go to the Grace Episcopal Church rummage sale. And you could buy, just like Kevin DeMartine has, that old bag of wooden clubs. At that time, golf was evolving from wooden shafted clubs to metal shafted clubs. And up at the Grace Church, all the well-to-do people around Millbrook were donating clubs. We could go in for $1.50 or $2 and buy 12 clubs. So they were hickory shafted, some of them dried out, some cracked, and if we broke one, you threw it in the woods. Or if you got mad, you broke it over your knee. But we had an inexhaustible supply of golf clubs. I wish I'd have kept them. And anyway, when I was about 8 or 10, a man here asked me to caddy for him. We said, what's a caddy? You carry the golf bag. So we carried it, and at the end of 9 holes, he gave me a quarter. I went home, I told my father, I said, the guy gave me a quarter to carry his golf bag. My father went to the guy's house and told him, if you ever give my kid a quarter again, I'll kick your butt. 50 cents or $1. So anyway, I started caddying all the way through the late 40s, through the 50s, and I used to caddy for a lot of the, affluent Dr. McKenzie, who won the championship 5 times, Darrell Parshall, who married Oakley Thorne's aunt, the 2 Dr. McKenzies, Thomas Johnson and his son, Thomas Johnson C. Anyway, we caddied for them for years. And at that time, this golf course right now is one of the luscious golf courses around. It is gorgeous. I mean, you can putt on the tees, the green, even the fairways. In those days, this thing was just, you got to the middle of May to the middle of October, it burnt to an absolute crisp. And I wouldn't say 5 to 10% of the golf course had green grass on it. And it was a local rule, you could move the ball anywhere as you wanted, that you could find, Vic can attest to that. You had to find a decent line, because you could actually hurt your hands. It was like hitting brick. So I caddied for these doctors and these people a lot. And I can remember the weather was different then. We would come to this 9th hole and be up 94, 96 degrees. you could actually see heat waves coming up the hill. And we would crawl to the top of the hill, the kids. In fact, when I got older, I carried 2 bags, like Beluch Willis did. And the guys would go in and have a couple cold beers. And we'd be out there drinking water. And Darryl Parshall, I never forgot it, always came out to me and said, "Johnny, let me back up on that. My name was Flanagan. Gilbert McKenzie, Dr. McKenzie, named me Mulligan." And a mulligan, for you people who don't know golf, is guys agree that someplace during a round you get 1 extra shot, and you can take it back. If you hit it in the woods, you take a mulligan. Well, Gil McKenzie named me Mulligan instead of Flanagan. And those guys called me that for years. And Darryl Parshall used to come up, when they went in for a beer, he'd come out and he'd say, "Mulligan, give all the caddies a cold soda and a candy bar." I never forgot that. He always made sure he took care of the caddies. We went to Hudson and caddied for him, buy his hand, he'd give me money to buy the caddies hamburgers and so on. And I never forgot that. And also, Teddy Ciferri was the one that taught me to grip a golf club correctly. He was practicing one day down in the 7th hole, and he says, "You want to hit a couple?" And I hit him, and he says, "Where did you learn to hold a golf club like that?" We just picked it up and we swung like a baseball bat. And Teddy, later on, and many years later, I wound up playing with Teddy for years. But anyway, these doctors they used to play every Wednesday afternoon. Because in those days, doctors and lawyers always took Wednesday afternoons off. And I would skip school Wednesday afternoons all spring and fall. And come to the end of the school year, and the report card comes out. And on the report card, it says, days in attendance, days absent. And my mother said, "What are all these? You missed 8 half days." And I said, "No, I was caddying up the golf course." She said, "Well, if you were out absent, you had to have a written excuse." My father would I used to go fishing, hunting with him. My mother would go to work 7:30 in the morning. My father would write out an excuse for me. We'd go hunting. So, anyway, this golf course has really evolved. And you get back to Beluch, this black guy. He worked for Alexander Kennedy here in Millbrook, who was a very good golfer up here. And then he got a job here at the golf course. And Beluch used to be out there pulling weeds out of the pond or out of the brook, stark naked. All the time. And they told him, I don't know how many times, but there was hardly anybody playing. And a big water snake would go by and Beluch would reach out and throw it in the woods. In the brook on the first hole, which is always a bubbling brook, he always had a couple 6-packs hidden under the bank. And he was a very, very good golfer, very talented golfer. But in those days, blacks never got to play golf very much. But even now to this day, Jim could tell you, I'm up here all the time, walking around, picking up golf balls, and I give them to the people playing. I throw them the balls and everything. Well, let me get back to when I won the golf championship. Excuse me. All the years I caddied here, I always, someday I'm going to win the championship at Millbrook. Just, it's in your head. Got out of high school in 1961, in college in 63. 63, I started working at the Poughkeepsie Journal. And 64 or 65, I joined the club here. But 67, I won the championship. And I was just speechless, because that's all I ever wanted to do was win the Millbrook championship. And then after I got home, I got thinking about it, what did I do? No big deal. And all my life I wanted to do it. So after that, I didn't play in it very much, but I love being up here. And the years that I played a lot here, the 60s and 70s, we had a group of 6 to 8 guys used to play 6 and 7 days a week for quarters. And let me tell you, you'd think it was $1,000 or $100 a hole. And there was nobody else playing, so we could play 6s and 7s. Rick played many times. His brother Dominic played many times. And we literally lived up here. Today, members play maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. We played 6 and 7 days a week up here. Enjoyed every minute of it. And this golf course really has evolved naturally to what it is today. All the watered fairways, watered greens, the lovely building here has been redone, the tennis courts. And it really played a large part in my life. Oh, I know one story I want to tell you. When I must have been 8, 10 years old, we were looking for golf balls. Well, it comes over me, I had to go to the bathroom terribly. I run in the woods, I drop my pants, and after I go, I grab a whole bunch of leaves and wipe and everything off. Poison ivy. In those days, when we lived on Church Street, we didn't have air conditioning or anything like that, and it was in the middle of a run of 90-degree days. I laid in the bed with just a white sheet, and every couple hours my mother would come in with calamine lotion and rub me down. I never forgot that, and boy, let me tell you, I never got poison ivy back again. I learned what it looked like. So, no, I have many, many pleasant memories of this place and that. And let me just say, history is important. I've been 27 years with the Sports Museum of Dutchess County, 25 as president. And if somebody like us or the town of Washington, Millbrook Historical Society doesn't save things, who's gonna? And there will be nobody to convey this stuff later. So anything you can do to help them, why, thank you. Thank you. Is it still Mrs. Greer?
I don't never know yet.
Okay. I can't let this meeting go without speaking up for the women. I don't hear a word about any women golfers here. And there's so many represented here, and I hate to say names because I'm not good with names. But I used to play for years with Gert Clark. Does anybody remember Gert? She played well up in her 80s. And Mary Murphy, Murtaugh Murphy, or whichever it goes. And Terry Bartell's daughter is over here. And Doreen Seppi, Nancy Woods, Judy Ciferri. We just had a ladies' league that was fantastic. And I can't let, you think that this golf course is just men. Because we had a ball for many years. And my daughter, my youngest daughter, Allison, who now teaches golf at Beekman Golf Course, she spent her whole childhood here playing down in the pond, catching frogs when her husband, Hubie Greer, wanted her to be playing. But she did become the New York State Junior Champion when she was 18. And then she went on to college and studied golf, and now she's an LPGA Class A pro. So anyway, the women are important here.
Just let me say, the best woman golfer ever played out of Millbrook, her name was Claudia Simpson. And Claudia could drive it into Brook on the first hole. And she played every Saturday and Sunday. I even know the names of the men she played with. And she used to take them to the cleaners. She was a very good golfer. She would not play with women because at that time, there was nobody up here that was anywhere as good as Claudia. But she couldn't be a women's club champion because they never had enough women to have a championship. Vic remembers her very well. I'm sure Skip does too. She was a very, very good golfer. So give the ladies her due. Claudia deserves it. Thank you.
We've been talking about memories and saving things and artifacts. And with that, I'd like very much for Kevin to come up. So Kevin, come up. Kevin's going to be very modest and very quiet. But for anyone who knows Kevin's passion for golf and what he's found over the years, Kevin, explain the things you've got and what's back there.
Well, I brought a set of old hickory shaft clubs that I bought from David Greenwood's nephew down in Carmel, New York. And I plan on maybe playing in the hickory tournament because I have friends that play golf, and it's a whole different game than the game today. You know, so I'm thinking about trying that out. I brought a selection of the old balls that are used in the old days, like got bircher balls from about 1900. Brought a selection of teas, a cocktail shaker, which, for the 19th hole, and, a few other items that you might want to go back and ask me about. But I've always enjoyed the game of golf, and I wasn't expecting to talk to you, so I had nothing prepared, but that's about all I've got to say.
Just 1 minute. We're talking about artifacts. The golf equipment, of course, is extraordinary, but this is one of the things that Kevin managed to rescue. Look at it. You talk about an Academy Award. This qualifies from my point of view. And the reality of how random things can be and how you can find things that are so important. We just so happens that we have a guest tonight who found one of the awards, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute. Right now, it's yours.
Thank you. And I'm just getting up, I don't have memories of golf and tennis in Millbrook, unfortunately, but I wanted to say something about the tennis because it really hasn't been addressed tonight at all. And the tennis actually started early on in 1914, 1919. I think there were clay courts or grass courts that were part of the Halcyon resort. And those courts were used by the club, which eventually became the golf and tennis club. And there was a big brouhaha about clay versus grass. And one of the courts got taken out and the other kind put in. And then more got built. And I think today, there are more people playing tennis here than golf on a regular basis. And a lot of championships have been established for both the golf and tennis ends of things here. And if any of the ladies here is involved in the golf or the tennis program, I would love for them to get up and say a few words. Not one, or just shy. All right, well, so you know, golf and tennis. We're back to the golf. One other thing, uniforms. When the golf started, jackets, ties, and knickers for the men, billowy blouses and long skirts for the women, and tennis then and now, all whites.
There were a few women golf tournaments in the early 1900s. History that movies actually. These are names like Jean Grant, Flagler, one, and so forth. A million names. So sorry we forgot them. Glad you got up.
And with that, there is this extraordinary trophy. So if you're, please bring it up, talk about it, and show them. This is the kind of discovery that we all would hope that we find, and on occasion someone does. So with that, there you go. Yes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Garth Bishop. I know a couple of members here. Rudy Zaki was a friend of mine. I know Kevin. And the pro I met before. Peter, nice to see you again. A little about me. I was born and raised in Mount Kisco, New York. Went to college at Geneva College in Western Pennsylvania. I was a caddy at Mount Kisco from the age of 12 until I was 22. And after I graduated college, I didn't play the game. I caddied for money, but I did get to meet a lot of fairly wealthy people down there, fortunately enough, in Mount Kisco. And I always had an interest in the game, I guess to some extent, but it wasn't until there was a caddy in the caddy yard who was banging a putter on the pavement that prompted me to say, "What the heck are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I hate this effing thing." So I said, "Well, let me see that." So he handed it to me, and I started swinging. And as fate would have it, the assistant pro saw me doing that, and came up to me and said, "What's your handicap?" And I said, Kevin, I've never played golf before in my life. And he said, "Well, you got a nice swing. Come on with me. I'll show you how to play the game." He took me down to the first tee, showed me how to grip the club. And before you know it, I was breaking 80 within 2 years. And joined the country club and was fortunate enough to be club champion and handicap champion the same year within 5 years of being a member there. So I say this not to brag, but just to merely point out that I was fascinated with the game. It came to me quickly, and I decided and knew that in order to really be good at it, you need to know the history. So from age 21 when I started till now, 40 years, I'm 61, I've been a collector, and I emphasize collector. I have not been in the business of selling or dealing in any way, shape, or form. For the record, Mr. Ciferri, it was nice to follow you, and Mr. Flanagan. I'm impressed with your club championship. I think that's great. But I think since I've met Ray Billows a few times, we'd be doing him a disservice if we told him that he made it to the final of the national championship twice. In fact, he made it there 3 times. He lost to Mr. Goodman, Mr. Marvin Ward, and to Willie Ternessa. Just for the record, I did meet him, and I had quite a bit of his memorabilia at my house, actually. But to what's going on here tonight, I did manage to buy from a collector many years ago a sterling silver cup dated 1897, which has some nomenclature on it. Let me get my glasses here. My wife's glasses, actually. But I think I can see it. It says, golf tournament first prize presented by the Halcyon, Millbrook, New York, 1897. Won by Reverend Dr. S. Delancey Townsend, August 21st, 1897. I bought it because I care about the history, as I mentioned, and had no intention of selling it, but if I go back to my youth and tell you about where I grew up in Mount Kisco, I grew up across the street from a gentleman by the name of Charles Revson. And if you recognize that name from Martin Revson, that's how I made it here indirectly, I'll tell you. Martin Revson was his brother. And since his passing that my wife and I, June over there, read in the paper, we felt a connection and decided to go to the funeral where I met Mr. Cornell, Jim Cornell. And with all the stories that were mentioned and spoken about at his funeral, 106 years old, I think you know, passed away, I approached Mr. Cornell and told him about this trophy. And he expressed a big interest in it. As fate would have it, just a few weeks later, maybe 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks later, we're here. You know, so it's very timely and fortuitous and fateful, I think, to some degree. That's it. But Kevin, I hope you don't mind. I took one of your golf balls over there because there's a poem that I know about which goes back to the 1890s, and the author's unknown, but I think you'll enjoy it. It's called Ode to a Golf Ball. Long ago, when first I bought you, you were white and fairly round, and a little gem I thought you, teed upon the teeing ground. But alas, the months have vanished, and if I must speak the truth, they have altogether banished the resemblance to your youth. For I've pulled you, and I've sliced you, and you've laid in banks of gorse, and I've temptingly enticed you from the cart ruts on the course. So though quite devoid of beauty, I would claim you as a friend who has nobly done his duty from beginning to the end, and receive my thanks unsparing, that you've heard with dumb assent the perhaps too frequent swearing, which I've used though never meant.
And this is a chance, if you have any stories you'd like to share, please do. And if not, then do check out all the objects and items that are in the back. If you have any questions about them, ask Kevin. And once again, I'm going to put this on the map to identify where the golf course is. 60 acres, going all the way back to the village. So thank you very much. And with that, have a great evening.